Hello everyone, this is Henry Parvel, and this will be my presentation for Religions and Values of Death for the religion of Zen Buddhism. So, a quick introduction. We will go over a review of Buddhism, the background of Zen Buddhism, the ways to Zen, and then the connections between Zen and death. Okay, so let's do a quick review of Buddhism. Um, Buddhism, remember, started in India and was started by Siddhartha Gautama, who is the Buddha, or the Enlightened One. He was a noble prince who left all of his possessions behind to go try and find out the meaning of life through his teachings, the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths are the presence of suffering, the cause of suffering, which is ignorance, the truth of suffering, that it doesn't end, and the only way to end it is by reaching nirvana. And the fourth noble truth is actually a way of attainment through the Eightfold Path. So the Eightfold Path is basically the way to get to the Four Noble Truths and understand everything and hopefully become enlightened and reach nirvana. Karma is like weighing things out. You get what you give. And Dharma is basically the lesson that the Buddha was trying to push forward. It's basically his message of the universe and how everything's connected and rebirth and the cycle of life and all that. Here's just a picture of Buddha and the 8 truths, the Eightfold Path there in the middle, and then karma is just, kind of like you get what you give. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the background of Zen and how it's a branch off of Buddhism. How did Zen come to be? So there are 3 ways that it is thought to have arose, and I have them sectioned off here into 3 different sections. So we'll go over the first one, the flower sermon. This is where the Buddha was giving a sermon to his followers, and he was speaking in very strange messages, and no one was able to understand him and understand his idea of the Dharma. So the Buddha holds up a flower, and only one man is able to understand him, Mahakaspaya. And Mahakaspaya is able to get this Dharma transmission through a non-conceptual way where the Buddha doesn't talk to him, and it's just like kind of mind to mind. And then Mahakaspaya goes on and spreads the religion that way. On the other hand, there's the idea of Bodhidharma. And Bodhidharma was a man in India who eventually made his way to China in the 5th century. And he had learned all of his things and wanted to spread them along. And so he spread all of his knowledge to Danzu Huike. And Huike was basically like the student to Bodhidharma. So Bodhidharma was the teacher, and Huike was the student. And we have this, in the second way, we have this direct transmission of the Dharma from teacher to student, whereas in the first one, it's this non-conceptual, silent transmission. And then the third nature, which is the Buddha nature, where you basically believe in the Buddha, the Buddha basically never left India. The people think that he's still around. And this idea comes out of the 3rd century India and moves into China. And so the way to understand the Buddha is by going through 2 entrances and 4 practices, which we will cover next. Here's just some pictures of the flower. There's Bodhidharma and Huike, and then just another Buddha. This is 4 practices idea that's kind of taken the lead as to how Zen has uh, gained a following throughout the years. So we kind of end up with these two ways to get into Zen. The first is principle. This basically is just understanding how Buddhism works and understanding that all of our concepts and our ideas and ways of life are wrong. They are in the way of the true meaning, and we have to get under that, get to the base layer of ourselves and find the truth there. So ignorance gets in the way of us finding enlightenment. A common saying from this would be, it simply is, you kind of get carried along by life and you are just existing in it as a part of it. And then we have the second entrance, which actually is the four practices. So you can actually get into Zen by practicing Zen. The first is, just kind of existing. The second is actually practicing. And so what are these practices? The first is to accept misfortune without anger. The second is to accept good fortune without confidence. And the third is to be without craving. And then what is this fourth practice? Practice without practicing. How does that work? Basically, if you were to practice, you're working too hard at practicing. So the only way to practice is to not practice. And this kind of goes back to the idea of Taoism, where everything just kind of is what it is, and you have to let go of your conceptions to be able to understand the truth. So what's the point, right? Who cares? What is Zen? What are we going for here? We're trying to reach Satori, which in Japanese is awakening. And remember, Japan is where Zen is most commonly practiced now. So you're trying to reach an awakening, and you're doing that through Dharma. You're doing that through Buddha's teaching. And the only way to get to Dharma is to break down the concepts through the practices and principles that we just went over. And you can learn these practices and principles in the schools of Zen, which are Soto and Rinzai. So let's go over Soto Zen first. This is the silent illumination path to enlightenment. They believe that nothing needs to be done, and the only way to get through it is just by doing nothing. And this goes back to the principle idea of just existing and letting things happen. It is what it is. So Dogen was actually one of the famous teachers of Soto Zen, and he had this saying, which was shikantaza, which is basically sit on your butt all day and do nothing. And these are just some examples, this stereotypical like meditation, staring at the wall, and then there's the Buddha reaching enlightenment. So now we get into this other school of Zen. We had Soto, and now we're getting into Rinzai. So this one focuses on the relationship between the teacher and the student. They think that the Dharma can only be passed along through direct connection and relationships. And they do this between the student and the teacher with these things called koans. And koans are these little insolvable riddles that the student has to solve. Now you may be saying, like, what the heck? What's going on with that? So koans, they're mainly used to force you to question your understanding of the concepts in the world. They are basically concepts of understanding in order to understand how concepts are bad. So it basically turns concepts against themselves. And this is the active, this is the practice where the four practices come in. So this is not passive, this is not meditation, this is relationship between student and teacher. So there's just like a kind of like what one of the riddles would look like. They're paradoxical and they can't be solved. And again, so here on the right is this would be the Grand Master in the middle, and all of the members around him would be the his students who are trying to learn the Dharma from him. And the Grand Master's lineage goes all the way back to, get this, Bodhidharma, who spread his knowledge to Danzu Huike way back when in the 5th century. So let's make the connection here. What is Zen teaching? It's basically teaching that concepts are paradoxical. You have to learn the concepts in order to understand how harmful they can be in reaching enlightenment. And these people who are trying to reach enlightenment are bodhisattvas. And they're doing this through Dharma, again, Buddhist teaching, and this directly relates back to Buddhism. You know, Zen Buddhism has all of these roots in Buddhism. And mainly the opposition for Zen Buddhism comes from firm Buddhist believers who think that Zen is just an offshoot and it's not serious enough, and it's just, you know, kind of a waste of time, and you're not going to reach enlightenment at the end of it. So what does Zen teach? Through the practices and through the principles, through the schools of Zen, you are taught to be tranquil. You learn to live in beauty and simplicity and take life for what it is and be grateful. And don't be so harsh on yourself for life's downsides, because they're normal. What happens to someone who's practicing Zen Buddhism when they die? At the time of death, the Buddhists will be ordained. They receive a Buddhist name, and this is to ensure that they don't come back into the same family in their next rebirth. The purpose of this ordination is to basically guarantee a rebirth, or samsara, into the next life. It's through these constant cycles of rebirth and samsara that these practitioners are trying to reach nirvana, or enlightenment. And death is such an important part, and it's so honored in Japan, that every year they have a Oban festival, which is a festival for the dead. Here's just a picture on the left of the rebirths and the constant cycle of life and death according to Buddhism. And then on the right is the Oban festival in Japan. So what's important for the funeral director? With a Buddhist death, you can expect a cremation. Burial is not typically done. Be ready to help set up altars at the time of visitation and service. There are 2 altars, the decedent altar and the Buddha altar. Make sure to be aware of different rituals that happen at different times. There are certain rituals that happen at time of visitation and certain ones that happen at time of service. And these services are pretty nice. They're, you know, they have lots of flowers, and prayers are said, and all of the Buddha chants. Here's just some Buddhist funerals. You can see the altars along with the heavy use of flowers. So Zen Buddhism really has some strong roots in normal Buddhism, and it's through the teachings that you can understand the Dharma. Death is rebirth. Incorporate Zen into your life daily.